Now we have Stephanie Boughton, who's going to present types of research integrity issues encountered by a specialist research integrity group.
Hello, so I'm going to be presenting some data on the types of research integrity issues that we saw as the BioMed Central Research Integrity Group. I'm now actually part of a wider Springer Nature Research Integrity Group, but this data is all from BMC journals. So, research integrity issues is quite a broad, a broad category of things, including research ethics issues with publication ethics, but there's not a huge amount of data on how common they are. So in terms of published literature, there's some data from retractions, so the reasons for why articles are retracted. There's also data if the results of institutional investigations are made public. There's also surveys asking sort of researchers how common misconduct or questionable research practices are. And then in terms of in getting an idea of more day-to-day things, we see from the cases brought to COPE forums, we get an idea of some of the issues that editors are dealing with, but obviously these are only the really complex cases that the editors felt that they need to go and seek advice from COPE. But we know little about the day-to-day research integrity issues that are faced at journals. So we decided to have a look at the data on the research integrity issues encountered by the Research Integrity Group and to categorize the relative frequency of the different types of issues. So the Research Integrity Group is a specialist editorial group. We provide support for editors and in-house journal staff in dealing with issues relating to research ethics, publication ethics, and research integrity. And at the time of data collection for this study, we provided advice across approximately 300 open access journals spanning biological and medical disciplines. And so the way that we hear about these issues and provide advice is we receive emails from internal staff or sometimes external academic editors asking for advice on research integrity issues relating to submitted manuscripts or published articles, and these really vary widely in terms of their complexity. And the amount of support that we provide then varies accordingly, so from providing advice to the editor to taking over handling and helping them with complex cases. So for this study, our inclusion criteria were all new queries that were sent to the BMC Research Integrity Group over a 2-year period from the start of January 2015 to the end of December 2016. And these related to any aspect of research integrity and in any journal published by BMC on submitted manuscripts and published articles. And then we categorized these issues that were arising by the type of issue they were. And then we've done some analysis on the categories, looking at the overall frequency of these different types of issues, and then looked at them pre-publication and post-publication. And these are sort of queries that sometimes may amount to nothing or may turn out to be, say, a serious issue with the manuscript or article. So we based our categories on the COPE case taxonomy, but these have been adapted to fit the types of issues that we see on our journals. So authorship is basically anything relating to authorship. So, for example, authorship disputes, maybe sort of questions of whether there's been sort of authorship for sale or gift authorship or ghost authorship. Competing interests is any like allegations of undeclared competing interests. Data issues we've used as a very broad category, so this is anything pertaining to the content or the ownership of the data of the paper. So, for example, a data ownership dispute, honest error found in articles, or maybe cases of alleged fabrication or falsification of data. And this category also includes concerns about image manipulation as well. Ethics and consent is any questions relating to ethics approval for the study, concerns about the ethics for research involving humans or animals, concerns about the consent process from the study, consent to publish potentially identifiable information or images, and we've also grouped into that any questions about trial registration. Peer review process, any concerns about the peer review process, and maybe any concerns about potentially unverifiable reviewers or attempted manipulation of the peer review process. And then plagiarism and duplicate publication also includes duplicate submission, text recycling, and use of images without appropriate permission. So during the time period that we studied, we received 1,040 individual queries from editors. And when we look at how these break down in terms of pre-publication and post-publication, we see that the largest group is relating to submitted manuscripts, so before publication, and there were 690 of these, so 66% of the total queries. And then 350 of them, so 34%, related to published articles. And as we can see from this chart, ethics and consent was the largest category, followed by plagiarism and duplicate publication. And just to put some numbers on those, ethics and consent amounted to 362 queries, plagiarism and duplicate publication, 240. But if we move to look at these pre- and post-publication, which I think is more interesting data, we see that before publication, almost half of the queries that we're receiving are relating to ethics and consent, and that the other categories are then much smaller. But if we then look at this after publication, so these are the queries that we as a team are receiving relating to published articles, we're seeing that ethics and consent has gone down to a much smaller percentage of the queries that we're receiving, and the category of data issues is the most common, amounting to 41%, which is 144 queries. And it's worth noting, just with these two charts, that the overall number of queries received on submitted articles was a larger number. So actually, in terms of absolute numbers, everything is arising more commonly on submitted manuscripts, so pre-publication, apart from data, where we're getting more queries on published articles. So from the results, we can see that some types of queries that we're getting are arising in different frequencies in terms of whether they are before or after publication. So ethics and consent is amounting for, by far, the biggest group before publication. And I think there's a number of reasons for this. I think this is coming up before sort of on submission, because authors are required to put in statements of ethics approval, of consent, in their manuscripts, and editors are checking these as they're assessing the manuscripts. And obviously reviewers and editors are also alert to any concerns about ethics involving humans or animals. And I also think that perhaps the reason that we're getting many of these escalated to our team is perhaps the sort of perceived seriousness of these issues, and the fact that maybe the editor feels that they need some advice because of the fact that this could be concerns about research involving humans. Now, some of these queries sort of vary in terms of concerns about something that's maybe seems like something very unethical has been done, to fairly simple queries about, I'm not sure whether this ethics statement is appropriate. When we then look post-publication, we saw that data is the biggest issue that's arising. And I think, again, there's a number of reasons for this. I think, firstly, if there's issues to do with, say, data ownership disputes, I think the person who's disputing the ownership of the data will notice this when the article is published. I think in terms of concerns about the content of the study, I think, again, the reason that these are coming up more frequently after publication is perhaps that that there's more eyes on the papers, that people are trying to reproduce the studies, and that's when concerns are being raised. It could also be that the editors, if concerns are raised about the data prior to publication, then they're rejecting the manuscripts because they feel very happy dealing with that themselves, whereas if concerns are raised after publication, then they're coming to us for more help. And we do see we provide support on dealing with retractions and sort of serious corrections. So this may be why we're seeing more of those. Other issues seem to come up similarly before or after publication, say, for example, authorship was relatively low compared to maybe how much you'd expect there to be sort of issues with authorship. So maybe, again, it's that editors are comfortable dealing with these issues on their own. Now, there's quite a few limitations to bear in mind when interpreting this data. There's no requirement for editors to escalate issues to the research integrity group. We're there to provide support as and when they need it. So it may be that the editors are dealing with many issues themselves, or actually their in-house contacts are maybe comfortable dealing with particular issues. Not all of the things raised to us turn out to be issues, and we're seeing a wide variation in complexity and severity of the types of issues. And so some of them may relate to just one manuscript, but then some of them will relate to multiple manuscripts, which could span different journals. But these will be categorized. The way we've analysed our data, these will be categorized as sort of one query. And all of these journals are biomedical journals, so we couldn't necessarily extrapolate this data to other fields. So finally, some thoughts to end on. I think there's potential implications from these results on informing the training and resource needs for editors and in-house staff, so the areas that maybe they feel less comfortable on, the areas where issues come up more frequently and that more training and resources is needed. But perhaps, for example, with the number of ethics sort of issues that are coming up pre-publication, perhaps more training for researchers on what the requirements will be when the research is submitted to a journal. And I think there's also things that can be learnt from this in terms of editorial policy wording, instructions for authors, wording to make sure that these things are clear. And I think that the data issues arising after publication also suggest that peer review, if, say, for example, you have cases of fabricated or falsified data, then this isn't something that peer reviewers are necessarily always able to pick up. I think there's lots more interesting information that we could find out in this area, so looking at other fields, looking at the outcome of the manuscripts and the articles that we've provided advice on. So thank you very much.
Okay. We do have some questions. Go ahead.
Rob Sebus from New Zealand. As an editor of a small journal, I find your data very interesting, and over many years I've encountered the various amounts. I didn't realize really that some of them were bigger problems than others. What I'm more interested in is, what is the percentage of total publications that you receive and the amount of queries your editors send to you?
So I don't have the figures sort of to hand on that, but it is a very small percentage of the total articles that are published that result in any issues, and then I think we're seeing an even smaller percentage of these. I think these numbers are very small in terms of the overall numbers of journals that we're providing support on, and the numbers of articles they're publishing. But yeah, it would be very interesting to look at these as percentages of total publications.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Malcolm MacLeod from the University of Edinburgh. Thank you. Now, for research involving human subjects, there are fairly well-established international ethical guidelines through ICH GCP. And for research involving animals, that's not the case. There's a number of different ethical standards in different domains. And in fact, Retraction Watch carried an example last year of research that had been approved in one domain that wouldn't have been approved in many others. Was that an issue that was live in any of your ethical concerns, or did that not hit your radar?
Yep. So the reason that we've sort of grouped the whole category together of ethical issues is that the number of ethical issues arising on the animal ethics issues arising was very small. I would say, both in terms of looking at this data, but also anecdotally, by far the most concerns, sort of issues that we receive from editors relate to research involving humans. And I think one of the reasons for that is, as you say, there's much clearer frameworks and much clearer regulations around research involving humans. So I think it's sometimes clearer cut when the editor is concerned about them. We do see sort of issues relating to animal ethics. I think anecdotally that's probably all prior to publication. And as you say, it's normally say an editor reading this and saying, maybe this has ethics approval for the study in the country it was done in, but I don't think it fits international guidelines. I'm not comfortable with that. And then the kind of advice that we would give the editor on that is that if they're not comfortable with what was done and they're not happy with the ethics of it, then they can reject it on ethical grounds, and that we would perhaps suggest following that up with the authors, but maybe also their institution, to kind of say, we understand this had ethics approval, but we have concerns about what was done in the study.
We're running short of time. I do have a couple of questions on Twitter and Facebook. So this is from Twitter. Could increased data sharing reduce issues with data data issues that arise post-publication?
Yes, I think more eyes. I'm assuming this is saying sort of data sharing before publication.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the reasons that these issues are coming up is that maybe there's not been as much scrutiny as sort of with the numbers of people that are then looking at it after publication. So yeah, I think that could go some way to help that.
And then this question from Facebook. I have observed the same paper published in 2 journals and have read papers with the methods section lifted verbatim from another paper. Are researchers expected to report such issues to journals?
Yes, I think if you spot any concerns on a published article, then yes, do report it to journals, because editors and publishers have responsibilities to the published literature, and if there are concerns about published articles, then yeah, we would take them as seriously as concerns that are raised prior to publication and look into them.
We've just got time for one very quick question, if you have.
Yes, yeah. Irene Hames. It's lovely to see the COPE taxonomy being used, because I should say I was involved in the creation of that 4 years ago. So data, that was the only category that increased on publication. Did you do the analysis, and sorry if I missed this, of which of the areas had increased using the keywords of the different components that constitute data?
No, so we categorized sort of everything that came into our sort of category of data. We categorized as data, so I don't have the sub-analysis on the different types of data issues. I think that's something that would be really interesting to look into, and I know that the COPE taxonomy does go into, you've got a lot of subheadings within the different categories, and I think that's something that would be really interesting to look into in more in more detail than this, because we've gone for quite broad categories.
Yeah, I would guess it would be images. I mean, I don't know if people know about Elizabeth Bick's work, who has been looking by eye, checking 52,000 papers and finding an enormous amount of duplication in the published literature in very reputable journals. So I wouldn't be surprised if data is...
I think.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to have to. We are encroaching into coffee time now, so I'm going to stop there and say thank you to all of our speakers. And be back here at 3:30, please.